There are a few reasons I've been looking forward to today's video. For one, I don't have to test or really even think about graphics cards. I like graphics cards, but I've been covering them a lot lately. Instead, I'm going to talk about something that plugs into the graphics card, and that is a monitor. Specifically, the Cooler Master Tempest GP27U monitor that I have right here. This is a mini LED backlit monitor, and that's another reason why I've been looking forward to it. I've only really seen mini LED monitors at trade shows, so I'm excited to have one here in my office so I can take a look at it and compare it to other panel types. And lastly, because this is a gaming monitor with a 160 Hz refresh rate and adaptive sync support, I think I should play some games on it.
Excellent!
Today's video is brought to you by the Corsair Voyager A1600 laptop, built for gamers, streamers, and creators alike, and packing an 8-core, 16-thread AMD Ryzen 6800HS processor, Radeon RX 6800M graphics, a 240Hz 16-inch 2560 by 1600 IPS screen with FreeSync of course, Vengeance DDR5 memory, Stream Deck functionality built in, and topped with a directional mic array and 1080p webcam. It has low-profile RGB Cherry MX mechanical switches too. The feature list goes on, you guys, so click the sponsor link in the video description for more. So let's begin by taking this monitor out of the box, which seems like a good idea for just about any product I'm going to take a closer look at. It is well packaged and there's plenty of foam to keep the monitor safe in transit, but you probably want to slide it out of the box with all of these components and accessories on top rather than on the bottom. The monitor comes in 3 pieces: the panel itself, the vertical support stand, and the base. All these parts have a nice dark gray finish, and the vertical stand has a little clip in the back so you can route your cables for cable management. It also snaps quite easily onto the back of the monitor, and there is a standard VESA mount underneath that if you want to wall mount or use some different kind of mount than the one that ships with it. The base is also shaped like the Cooler Master logo, which is a nice accent I suppose, but it also provides a nice sturdy base for the unit as well. Beyond that, the accessories included in the box are the AC power adapter, the brick itself, as well as the power adapter cable, and those do come separately. Sometimes these are housed within the monitor and you just need to plug a cable into the monitor. That can be nice so you don't have an external brick. However, the plus side to having a brick is that if this were to fail further down the line, it's much easier to replace just the AC power adapter than the entire monitor. You also get a USB 3.0 A to B cable, and that is to connect this to the USB on your computer. And the monitor also has a built-in KVM switch, which is a nice add-on, and that would use this cable as well. And then you get 3 video cables, an HDMI 2.1, since this monitor does have 2 HDMI 2.1 inputs that are full bandwidth, 48 gigabits per second, which is great for connecting up consoles, or computers of course for that matter. You get a DisplayPort cable too, and that's DisplayPort 1.4A capable, because that is the most you would need for this monitor based on the 4K resolution and the maximum 160 Hz refresh rate, and a USB Type-C cable, since the monitor has a Type-C as well that supports DisplayPort alt mode that can also charge a connected device with up to 90 watts of juice. Beyond that, you get a quick start guide and some warranty information, as well as the color calibration factory report specifically for this monitor. It does come color calibrated from the factory. The ratings.com review of this monitor, which is linked in the video's description, recommends doing manual calibration if you're going to be doing content creation work out of it, because then you can get very precise and accurate colors. And then mine also came with this little corner sticker, which is usually used when they're out for display in like a retail store or something like that. Just thought that was kind of funny that that was also included. And this gives you a nice rundown of the internal specs of the monitor, which I'm going to go over next. But real quick, I mentioned the ratings.com review of this monitor just now, and I want to point out that I have actually a handful of reviews listed down in the video's description. And that's because I want to be right up front that when you're reviewing a monitor, to do it properly requires a bit of extra equipment, and that's to properly test if you're actually getting the right brightness levels and color gamut reproduction out of the unit. I do not have those tools available, so I'm also going to be doing a little bit of a review roundup to cover some of the reviews that actually have tested this monitor a little bit more in depth, and again, I'll post links to all of those down in the video's description. The other thing I wanted to bring up is that this monitor actually has a lot of buzz around it, which might be surprising because Cooler Master isn't necessarily known for making monitors. It's something they haven't done very long. They have a handful of them available, but they're not quite as well known as some of the other monitor manufacturers such as Samsung or Asus, for example. But even though the GP27U has already been out for a couple months, they're pretty much sold out everywhere that I've looked for them, at least domestically here in the United States. And that is in part because of the buzz, and the buzz is in part because of the feature set, which includes mini LED backlighting, an IPS panel, 160 Hz refresh rate with adaptive sync on a 4K display, and the retail price for this is $800, which, yes, isn't the least expensive for a monitor, but for a monitor with all these features, it's one of the best prices you can find right now, and that's why they're very much sold out. And the resolution is 4K, 3840 by 2160. There is also a QHD or 2560 by 1440 version of this panel as well. And that one actually goes up to 165 Hertz, but I'm not covering that today, so I won't distract myself with that information. The IPS panel in the front is backlit by mini LEDs. Mini LEDs has several benefits, but one is that they're much smaller than traditional LEDs. So rather than handling that backlight with edge lighting or with zone lighting, you have what's called FALD, or full array local dimming, and the number of zones you have in an FALD display determines basically how specific the backlight can get. This one has 576 local dimming zones, and yes, there are many LED backlit panels that have more than that, but those don't cost less than $1,000. Another advantage of mini LED backlights is that they can get much brighter than one of the other peak display technologies out there, OLED, which typically maxes out at about 600 nits of brightness. The mini LEDs in this panel can go up to 1200 nits of brightness in HDR mode, and that drops down to 600 nits of brightness in SDR mode. But when you combine that with the quantum dot layer that's in front of the panel as well, then it gives you really good color gamut coverage, up to 98% of the DCI-P3 color gamut, as well as, again, excellent HDR support, and this is certified for HDR 1000. To finish covering the specs they thought were cool enough to put on the sticker, adaptive sync support, since it has up to 160 Hertz refresh rate. That's basically variable refresh rate technology. I'm not sure if it's gone through yet, but they've applied for FreeSync Premium Pro certification with AMD for this monitor, but since it has FreeSync support, it will also work just fine with NVIDIA graphics cards, since NVIDIA GPUs can also run variable refresh rate on FreeSync monitors. They have also listed low blue light flicker-free technology, color space conversion, 6-axis color adjustment, dynamic overdrive, and the IPS LCD panel that's in here is an ultra speed one. And that is specifically referring to response time, because IPS panels often don't have quite as good of response time as some of their TN panel counterparts. This panel here is listed with a 1 millisecond response time, but you should note that there are various overdrive modes that you can enable or disable that might get you a little bit better response time. But Tim of Monitors Unboxed has already reviewed this monitor as well, and he found that with some of those overdrive modes, the ghosting or inverse ghosting could become a little bit too distracting and made it somewhat unusable. So it's not really recommended to use the ultra fast overdrive setting. You can dial that back to advanced, and that'll get you a much better color representation while making the response time about 1 to 2 milliseconds. So at this point we can talk about the chassis, the housing, the stuff surrounding the panel. And one of the minor quibbles about this unit is that the housing itself doesn't necessarily feel that premium. That said, the panel itself has a gray plastic housing, and it does have some gamer RGB accents along the back. Since this is a gaming display, you gotta have some RGB in there, right? It's gonna improve your frames per second. It will default to cycling between a bunch of different colors. Doesn't look too bad. It's probably not gonna be something that you look at a lot depending on where you have this monitor positioned on your desk and whether you walk behind your desk very much. But other than that, there's a single control knob that's positioned around the right side of the panel on the back right. I tend to prefer control knobs that are here in the middle, but I do prefer control knobs because you can use it to press and you can use it to navigate up, down, left, and right, because it's like a little joystick. And that makes it at least somewhat reasonable to navigate around the on-screen display, which appears in the bottom right and has access to most of the features that you might expect, such as enabling or disabling gaming features, turning HDR mode on and off, and accessing the advanced settings. The stand itself is also quite reasonable. It's a bit more sturdy, made of metal, than the housing of the panel itself, and it does allow for 4 ranges of ergonomic motion control or adjustment of the panel, which is height, tilt, swivel, and pivot. It can do all of those. It can't do all of those a lot, but it can do all of those some. As for connectivity, you have 2 of those aforementioned HDMI 2.1 full bandwidth connectors. You also have a single full-size DisplayPort 1.4. Then you have that USB Type-C that can also operate in DisplayPort mode, and that can also provide 90 watts of power if you connect a laptop to this monitor, for example. There's also the power connector, of course, a headphone jack. This monitor does have 2 built-in speakers, which are adequate to give you some sound output, but probably aren't going to be the best for long-term use. And then there's a USB-B connector for your upstream, as well as 2 USB Type-A connectors. Now, as I said from the get-go, I'm not calling this a full review on this monitor or anything like that, but I did have a chance to do a bit of game testing, and I was able to turn on HDR mode. And turning on HDR mode in Doom Eternal, for example, gave me a very nice HDR gaming experience. HDR is it just hits different. At first you're like, what's the deal with HDR? And then you turn it on and you're like, oh, like there's so much more range. That's why they call it high dynamic range, because you can see darker darks, you can see lighter lights, but you don't have blacks that are completely inky so you can't see anything, and you don't have brights that are so blown out that you lose all detail there as well. And now let's do a quick review roundup to see what some other people thought about this monitor who had some of the tools to test it that I do not. First, we have Rtings, or I guess it's just ratings.com is how you're supposed to pronounce it. They just recently reviewed it, and we should note that there are actually two firmware versions for this monitor. One that shipped out with initial review units, and another one that was just made public on December 2nd. And that firmware update was able to fix a few little issues, but one thing in particular, which is that HDR and variable refresh rate weren't working at the same time at the full refresh rate of 160 Hz. That has now been fixed, so make sure if you do get this monitor that you update the firmware to that latest version. That said, ratings.com gave this an 8.4 overall for mixed usage, and 8.6 for office usage, and 8.8 for gaming. It does seem to excel particularly in that field. 7.9 for media consumption, 8.3 for media creation, and 8.0 for HDR. We also have a review from Display Ninja, and they actually thought quite highly of this monitor, giving it a 5.0 for design, a 4.9 for display, 4.9 for performance, and 4.9 for price to value, giving it a 4.9 overall. Here's another review from Monitor Nerds, and they also reviewed it with the initial version of the firmware, not the new version. So although they called it promising, they did say that the fact that adaptive sync and HDR wouldn't work at the same time was a deal breaker, but again, that should be fixed now. So you can see here their pros and cons, and if you remove that con there, the only one left is limited availability. We also have an excellent review from Tim over at Hardware Unboxed on their sub-channel Monitors Unboxed, another great one to check out if you guys have a chance. He also goes through a bunch of advanced testing, and here's where you can tell, for example, when in ultra-fast mode, there's a lot of overshoot, and that's why he didn't recommend that one. But in advanced mode, everything was pretty much fine, and that gave you a nice low response time. And one last review from eTechnics is also linked in the video's description. And if we jump over to the conclusion page, there's a nice little write-up here, which I highly recommend you guys go ahead and read, but they gave it an Editor's Choice Award, and that's always nice. And that is pretty much all I have to say about the Cooler Master Tempest GP27U monitor for now. But guys, let me know what you thought of this video. This was one of the ones that actually came in a couple months ago, right in the midst of the massive rush of Q4 reviews and everything, so I had to push it back a little bit. But if you guys enjoyed this video, definitely hit the thumbs up button, and definitely check the video description down below for links to this monitor, as well as many of the articles that I talked about today. Also, if you'd like to help support my channel, you can check out my store at paulshardware.net. Our holiday sale is going on through the end of the year, so you can get yourself some Paul's Hardware merchandise, beer sets, hoodies, water bottles, and more. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Subscribe to my channel if you're not already. Hit the thumbs up button on your way out too if you enjoyed it, and we'll see you all in the next one.